Yeah, let's start the webinar. Okay, I'll make a short introduction on the program, and then we start the webinar according to the planned program. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depend on where you are. Thank you for joining the webinar on water, energy, food, Nexus. Now we have, as you know, three outstanding speakers: Manas Puri from FAO, Hwanil Park from Stepi Korea, and Belinda Petri from South Africa. So thank you for three speakers for the wonderful contribution and commitment. And also we have a small number of guests. Esther, also Lamis and Soyeon. Thank you for your joining. And then, yeah, I'm Suil Kang, Coordination Officer of CTCN Partnership and Liaison Office based in Songdo, Incheon, Korea. So, and then I really, first of all, appreciate Jaewon for helping the organizing this webinar, and then Anastasia for helping us for the advertisement and the making the art for the advertisement, and also Nadezi. She's not here, but thank you, Nadezi, for the introducing Belinda as a speaker. Okay, so the UNCTCN is the implementation arm of the technology mechanism of the UNFCCC. The CTCN promotes technology transfer at the request of developing countries as they seek to meet their NDC targets and the Paris Agreement commitment. So the new CTCN third program of work, briefly POW, 2023 to 2027, identified two enablers for the system transformation: national systems of innovation and digitalization, and 5 system transformation areas. So one of them is water, food, energy nexus. The second one is building and infrastructure. Third one is sustainable mobility. Fourth one is energy systems. And the final one is business and industry. So based on the 5 system transformation areas, CTCN has planned to organize 5 90 minutes webinars every month from July to on collaborative RD&D by introducing international partnerships and networks on collaborative RD&D in each area, and to share the ongoing collaborative RD&D activities and funding program and the lessons learned, to encourage to join ongoing international collaborative RD&D partnerships and funding programs, and to develop twinning arrangement by matchmaking North-South, South-South collaboration demands. Okay, and then as you see on the screen, this is the today's program. So unfortunately, the Rajiv Garg, director ad interim of the CTCN, and the head of CTCN Palo should be here, but because of his schedule changing of flight, he could not join. So he will join from next webinar. And then First 20 minutes, we have Manas Puri from FAO. So his title is FAO's Water Energy Food Nexus Assessment. After that, Hwanil Park from Science and Technology Policy Institute, STEPI Korea, will deliver what he's doing in the Mekong region through the Korea UNDP project, and then the role of science, technology, and innovation. After that, we have Belinda Petrie, CEO of One World from South Africa. She will deliver talk on the water energy food security nexus, little heated but much needed. So yeah, after that we'll have like 10 minutes panel discussion. For that 10 minutes discussion, I will make a short question to each speaker, but it will not be difficult questions to you. And then we will show the next August webinar program, and then we'll close the meeting, close the today's webinar. Okay, to save our time, I think that we can start from the Manas, but actually because it is small group, I recommend only speaker may have like a camera on, and then for the participant, whenever you have a question during the Q&A session, you can turn on your camera, and also you can use the chat box to make questions. Okay, so I would like to invite Mr. Manas Puri from FAO for his talk on water energy food nexus. Floor is yours, Manas.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be present here and present FAO's approach on water energy food nexus. So just a quick background, this approach was developed to support our member countries to assess the interactions between the three sectors, because for a long time we tried to understand if there is a methodology that exists that can be deployed or taken up in different countries so that the results are then comparative. So just to set the scene and the background, what is the water energy food nexus? According to how we see it, there are the three fundamental elements that we need for life. It underpins our existence. We need water, we need energy, and we need food. And these three are intricately linked. Food production, for example, as a FAO is our entry point here. We need water, we need energy to produce food. We all know the importance of water in production of food, but somehow the importance of access to energy is not as clearly understood. So we've been trying to do that over the last 2 years. In fact, around 70% of all the energy that is consumed in the world is consumed by the agriculture sector, 30%. So all the value chain from production, consumption, storage, processing, all of that. The challenge that we've been seeing over the many years is that the energy, water, and food ministries, normally in most countries, they are independent ministries for these. They often do not talk to each other. They are silos and often fail to evaluate the synergies and trade-offs between the three sectors. So our entry point in this methodology is essentially to assess if there is a policy or an intervention in one of these sectors, what will be the impact on the other two, and what are the integrations, trade-offs, synergies that exist in that specific context? So within that country, within that region, wherever we are working on. So we know that between 691 to 783 million people were food insecure in 2020. While we also know that 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals and massive amount of energy to pump that water and move it goes to the agriculture sector. Even then, at the same time, around 675 million people did not have access to electricity in 21. So there are challenges that humanity is facing in all these three sectors. We need a lot of food insecure people in the world. The agriculture is already consuming a lot of fresh water, and in many countries, the fresh water is under stress. At the same time, while globally 30% of the energy is consumed by the agri-food chain, a lot of around 600 million people still do not have access to electricity. If you look at electricity access rates in, for example, rural sub-Saharan Africa, where majority of the food in that continent is produced, it's around 15 to 20%. I just came back from Zambia. Um, the electricity access rates in Zambia are 4% in the rural areas, and that is where the food is produced. So going forward, the country will develop, the agriculture system will develop, and it will actually consume more and more energy and more water in the coming decades. And these challenges are somehow exacerbated by climate change. We know that changes in precipitation due to climate change will negatively impact, for example, hydropower production. This is happening again in the case of Africa and Zambia, for example. Majority of the electricity is produced by hydropowers. Last year, because of the drought, the electricity production rates went down. This not only impacts the energy side, but also the agriculture side, because then the dam is also used as a way to irrigate the agriculture fields there. So as we move forward, we already have challenges in terms of how water is used, how energy is used, and the demand in the future. But climate change will actually exacerbate them because these will become a little bit more less understood. We will changes in precipitation patterns would change how we consume water in the agriculture sector as well. And to understand that now will ensure food security for the future. So where do we know? So FAO comes in and we think we need action in three broad aspects. One is to increase awareness about the interconnected nature of the water, energy, and food sectors. We also need to increase engagements between the ministries of energy, water, and agriculture in order to develop policies that are aligned well with each other. We cannot have a scenario where one policy is developed in a silo which has a negative impact on the other one but a positive impact on the sector where it is supposed to be. And the third one is to identify and implement and scale up water, energy, food nexus interventions that maximize the synergies between the three sectors and minimize the trade-offs. So this is where our methodology comes in. This is where the framework comes in. We have four essential elements to it. The first is stakeholders dialogue, which basically is aimed at raising the awareness on the trade-offs and energies and the synergies of the three sectors. The second one is actually to evaluate the performance. It could be a performance of a policy, an intervention, or even an infrastructure project. And I'll give you an example very soon after this slide. The third one is to evaluate in terms of put a figure on it, put a number on the sustainability of that context, where that intervention is implemented, and then give options to the stakeholders to choose which intervention is the best in that specific context. So all of this combined provides the structure of the assessment that we normally carry in countries. So in terms of the flow, it is the chart on the right shows what the flow is, what are the steps are. It always starts with the context analysis to understand the baseline, where exactly are we, which country, what are the current stress on the water side, on the energy side, what are the bottlenecks on the three sectors. And if within the country there's already information available and they're aware of the challenges of the nexus, it's essentially a discussion, a qualitative analysis, and then we go to see what response options to not the case. So then we do the quantitative assessment, which has 4 steps. Essentially, data collection for the intervention, formulation of relevant indicators. We calculate the benchmarks against which they are judged and analyzed, and then we represent the results. And I'll go very quickly giving an example of what this actually means. But in terms of the technical assessment, so the green block here, it is basically on 2 levels. One is the intervention level and the context level. Now, when I say intervention level, it basically means assessing how the intervention is performing. So let's say if it's a solar powered desalination plant setup in Spain, and that's the example that we're going to analyze. We first want to see how the intervention itself is performing from the Nexus point of view. So a solar powered desalination plant is using energy from solar panels. using seawater to desalinate water to produce fresh water that is used for consumption as for food production, for irrigation. So that's one side of it. It tells us how that intervention is performing, but it doesn't tell us how sustainable it is within the context in which it is embedded. So we also do a context level analysis where we try to compare the context, in this case, the country's bioeconomic pressures to their peers in other countries or a benchmark, and see how the intervention is suited within that context, because one intervention will not have the same kind of impact in all different kind of contexts, because the bioeconomic pressures are quite different in different countries. So there are two levels, and this is what we go up ahead with. So the example that I'm taking is a wind power system that is used to desalinate water in the Canary Island in Spain. So the first level that we analyze is the intervention level. So how is the intervention itself performing? For that, we start with building a matrix like this. For the 5 sectors, we have water, energy, food, but we also have labor and capital costs in this case. And we try to develop specific quantitative numbers that can tell us how each of these are related. So what is the yield of crops when water is applied to that specific area, or how much energy is consumed to desalinate 1 liter of water, one million liters of water. The same thing with labor and capital. How many jobs are created within that under this intervention? And of course, the costs. What are the costs of establishing or producing these entire intervention, or just to desalinate water? So this matrix, what it's doing is basically it is trying to link every element of the water, energy, food nexus, including capital and labor, to the other one. So we normally recommend have at least 2 or more indicators in each of this block. And then once we've calculated that, what we want to see is the intervention level impact. So for this case, we had all these indicators that we calculated. We had technical data from this company and the government that was installing this, and we tried to come up with a score. Now, how do we calculate the score? The score is calculated by taking the difference between how the intervention is performing in each of these indicators to a benchmark. So we go for each of these interventions in this table on the left, we have a benchmark. For example, how much energy is consumed to desalinate 1 liter of water. In this case study in Spain, it was 2.2 kilowatt hours per meter cube of water. We found that one of the best desalination plants that exists in the Thames in the UK, it consumes less energy than this one. So actually the score is minus 66%. So this is performing quite good compared to the benchmark we have. So what we've tried to do is for each of these indicators, we have the performance of the intervention, and we always have a benchmark to which we compare and then find the difference. Is it performing better than the benchmark, or is it performing worse than the benchmark? Once we have this, we give it a score, and this is the score that you have. This is a weighted average of all the indicators we have, and we plot it like this for each of the Nexus elements. So for water, based on this table, we have the score of 2.76. So as you see here, this is a spider chart that is presenting the performance of the intervention itself. So you see there's a very high impact on food/land. That is basically because a big part of land is used to establish the wind power system that will power the desalination plant. So the impact on land resources is quite big. However, compared to the benchmark, it is consuming much less energy to desalinate 1 liter of water than the existing technologies that we found in other countries. So it's performing really good on the energy side. On the capital and labor side, we found the costs of this plant are very comparable to the other ones in terms of also the jobs that they can provide are also completely comparable to the other ones. And therefore, the score is around 3.5. Now, while this already presents a good picture of the impact of the assessment, it doesn't tell us if this intervention is actually sustainable within Spain, because Spain, for example, might have other bioeconomic pressures on water availability, land usage, capital availability, labor laws, all of that. So then we have this as one result, and please remember this. benchmarks tell us the bioeconomic pressure of the country or the context that we are in. To do this, we quantify the context. In this methodology, we have grouped similar countries in together to calculate select indicators that define their benchmarks. For example, we have divided all countries in the world in 4 groups. The first is agriculture-based economy, but dry country, so big pressure on water. Agriculture-based economy, water-rich country, not a lot of pressure on water resources, they're available. Affluent country is rich, but they're constrained in natural resources. And transition country experiencing strong population growth. So this is more of the developing countries, poor countries. And these are just one of the suggestions we have. But if you do this methodology, you can build your own typologies and benchmarks. So based on this, we did all the calculations for the indicators for benchmarks for Spain. And we also give them a score. And this is the score on your right, which is a weighted average of the 2 indicators for. And we did the chart, but color coded. So if the ratio between the indicators and the benchmark is 1, then the pressure, there's no bioeconomic pressure on that element. So in this case, for example, for the food and land is green, which means this country, Spain doesn't have a lot of problems with land availability. It does have land that is available to be used. It is very good, in fact. The other ones, the lighter the shade is, it's okay. And if it's red, then there's massive pressure on that nexus element. So then basically what we do is we take the first result that we got, which is the intervention assessment, the score that we give. We superimpose it with the country context, as this graph tells you. This tells you the bioeconomic pressure on water, energy, food, capital, and labor within that context, in Spain in this case, and we superimpose them. So we get something like this. Now, what does this graph tell us? It tells us, A, the black side, which is the intervention performance. It says the impact on land resources is very high, but we also know that from our assessment and the calculations, the existing pressures on land resources in Spain is not that big. So this gives the policymakers an idea that, okay, this is a trade-off, but it is maybe in this case, it is acceptable. However, if we have the same performance of the intervention in a country where land resources are already stressed, for example, like India, instead of green here, it would be red. And that would tell the policymakers, look, we have a huge impact on land resources of this intervention, but we already have a lot of pressure on our land resources in the region where we're trying to implement it. So maybe that's not a good trade-off that we are willing to accept. So this is what the results in Spain tell us. It tells us that a high impact on land resources, low impact on energy, extremely low impact on water resources because no fresh water is used. Instead, desalinated water is used, and it is used for agriculture and food production, and the efficient use of labor and capital. Now, as I was saying, this is one way of representing it, and you can have, what it allows you to do is to look at the same intervention in different scenarios, different contexts, and see in which context it is more suitable. What are the current synergies between these 3? For example, in this case, the synergy is that it is using very less energy to desalinate a large quantity of water. That's a synergy that we want to capitalize on. What we don't want to capitalize on, or if in the case of Spain, there was massive land pressure on land resources, and the impact of this intervention is also extremely high on that land resource. That is something that's a trade-off that the governments might not be able to accept. So this is a very quick, short. We can go into much more detail and technicalities of this, but in very short in way to express and explain what the methodology does and what kind of results can be expected from it. Thank you. Any questions are very welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Manas, for the very comprehensive and informative presentation on the assessment WF Nexus assessment tool, which really is comprised of intervention level and then context level. So as I mentioned, okay, the floor is open. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, or you can turn on your camera and then make question to Manas. The floor is open now. Yep, I think that the Belinda made raise a hand first, and then Hwanil second. Yep, and also we have a trophy. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for that presentation. It's really interesting to see an assessment of that detail being applied in a completely different country to what I'm used to or will be talking about later. And I was intrigued at your points around pressures on land resources not being a big issue. And so it kind of shifts the trade-off decision-making, I think is really what you're saying. I'm just interested to know if what your experience, and I'll talk about this a bit more in my presentation later, but interested to know what your experiences have been of working with governance arrangements in terms of making decisions in Spain around that kind of trade-off decision or any other trade-off decisions, because I think, you know, our experience, and you've probably had something similar of the WEF Nexus, is that, you know, there's still silos in place. And so it's quite difficult to make joined up decisions. And I think understanding the trade-offs is very important in terms of making those decisions. But just wondered if you could let us know how the governance and institutional arrangements have worked in that regard. Thank you.
That's the million-dollar question, I have to say. I mean, the technicalities are on one side, and convincing governments and stakeholders to pick up those technicalities and make a decision in a way that involves the three sectors and the decision makers and the stakeholders together is quite complicated. What generally the approach that we followed after many years of failing to break the silos in governments in many countries is, as soon as we now start a project, the first thing we ask for is to have a technical working group and to manage and oversee everything. So we expect the governments, and we spend a lot of time convincing them to have representatives from the ministries to form a technical working group. As FAO, our line ministry normally is the Ministry of Agriculture. So we convince them to host this technical working group, where we have representatives from the Ministry of Agriculture, Energy. In some cases, we've also had representatives from Ministry of Trade, depending on the project and depending on the context in that sense. And that seems to have worked a little bit better. I can't say that even then, because then one is expecting that the representatives from all of these ministries will come, actively participate, go back and disseminate that kind of information back in the ministries and sort of increase the collaboration across the ministries. Compared to the scenario where we never had a technical working group, it definitely works better, but not to the extent that we would like it to work. You know, because often these ministries they're very, you know, they want to hold back and have their turf, you know, to themselves. And then if it's a energy issue, then you said, okay, well, go talk to energy people, and then we say, well, you know, but it'll have an impact on how water is used as well. So you need to have a discussion on this. But that has worked, I have to say. Establishing these technical working group does work.
Okay, Hwanil, yeah, please.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a really interesting and informative presentation. And I have a question about the data indicator you used for the assessment. And I think if the government impose some, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, so when you impose some policy into some national level or the local level, it affect I mean the food and energy and water resources. And for your presentation, in your presentation, I'm curious about your assessment is for some national level or some regional or local level. So when you collect some data for some place, it's really hard to collect the data for a small scale, or I mean the small local level. But usually we have the national level data, especially the water, energy, food. But if we focus on small area or local area, the data is very hard to find. So in that case, have you measured the data directly, or you use some other the quasi variables and so on? So, yeah, I'm curious that.
Yeah, that's a very good question as well. We were very lucky because there are two levels of assessment here, right? One was the intervention level, so how the desalination plant is performing. For that intervention level assessment, we were lucky enough to get the data from that plant. Now, the context level was quite different because we were unable to go to that local area and measure the bioeconomic pressures of water, energy, food on that local area. So then we had to look at the regional data that was already existing with the government. So the context level analysis, the second part, to see the impact or the pressures on the region, the country, is always based on existing data. And I can share the publication with you. What we did was we compiled all the data that is freely available in the world about all countries and all indicators that you can go and find right now about those countries. So, because I mean, the methodology that we've developed is extremely data intensive, and often to find that data is impossible. So for the context level analysis, we were using data that was freely available, already existing with the countries. This assessment will not be possible if we don't get the local level data for the intervention. That it makes no sense to do and this kind of assessment at the intervention level without getting primary data at the first part of the analysis. The second part is much more difficult, as you were saying, because for local impacts, regional impacts, the data is very limited. So we had to work with some of the proxies or some of the existing data that we could find from the existing sources that were publicly available. But I'll send the link to the publication in the chat now. And there's a whole list of sources where this kind of data is already available. So when you're choosing the indicators, which ones you want to choose, you can also go and look at the sources and see what is available, what is more suitable for that kind of intervention.
Okay, thank you. For the final floor, I'll give it to Drupi. Could you turn on the camera and the mic? Thank you.
Yes. Hi, I'm Trupti. I'm based in the western part of India right now, and in Ahmedabad. So I don't have any question, but I really impressed with your methodologies and the assessment tools basically, and so how to convert the qualitative information since quantitative and link it with the policy measures. So this is extremely impressive for me. My climate adaptive technology Bungru is basically we are working in India as well as in Vietnam, Ghana, right now in Rwanda, and also in Bangladesh. So I'm just asking you that whether do you have the similar kind of studies or maybe any kind of the papers which can measures in the area of WEF, I mean, in the context of India, Ghana, I mean, in these countries basically. So that is the one thing which helped me because we are the implementers. So we are so busy with the implementation, and sometimes the asking the questions about the impact, and we have the data, but we don't know. I mean, convert it into this kind of environment, which is a requirement for many people, like the policymakers, investors, funders, etc. So if the similar studies available in this context of this one, so it will help us to convert our things. Thank you.
Thanks, Trupti. We have a publication now which has 6 or 7 of these case studies, like what I just presented. So I can share that with you. However, we haven't done this kind of assessment so far in East Africa and Rwanda. We've done other kind of assessment that you might find interesting. They are mainly to do with how renewable energy can be deployed in food value chain, what impacts will it have, but not, that's more of a energy food nexus rather than water energy food nexus. But I'll post all of them in the chat, and it might be good for you to have a look and see. And if you have any questions, always feel free to write to me and I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Manas, for the wonderful presentation, and then very useful answers to 3 questions. Okay, now considering the time limit, we will move on to the second presentation by Dr. Hwanil Park from Stepi, Korea. Yeah, thank you. Floor is yours, Hwanil.
Okay, thank you, Sunil. Let me from my material. Okay, so can you see the material, the full screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me this wonderful webinar. The Korean government, the Ministry of Science, Technology and ICT is conducting some development project with UNDP in Mekong area to develop the policy and technology for the sustainable consumption and production of water, energy, food in terms of Nexus approach. So I'm going to deliver what we are doing now in Mekong area and how the STI can contribute for this project. Okay, we have many challenges at this moment. Climate change, population growth, urbanization, and we are observing many changes in terms of economy, technology, and sociology, and so on. And then these changes and many variables get together, and they create some global grand challenges, such as the water, energy, the food depletion, and decrease in biodiversity, and emerging infectious disease, and so on. There are many other global challenges too. And the property of the global challenges are continuously evolving and dynamic, and they are impacting the futures as well as the current, and also they affecting cross borders around the world. And as you may know, we know the global risk, and the World Economic Forum published the report every year. And in terms of the likelihood and impact of the global risk, we see some risk related climate change, biodiversity, natural resource, and the extreme weather and so on. They are located at the top right side of the graph, which means they create a lot of impact when they happen. Also, the probability of the happening is also great. And what's more severe, we have to think is that those risks are all connected each other. So you can see on this diagram, it's also from the World Economic Forum report. The natural disaster, extreme weather, food crisis, water crisis, and so on. These risks are top risks we are facing, and they are all directly or indirectly connected each other. So once we put some policy on one side, I mean, we impose some technology or policy to tackle one problem, one issue, it affect the other side, and we are not sure how those how those affect the other exactly, because they are very well interconnected, and they are very complex. So it is really hard to imagine, or it's very hard to forecast how the influence that is created by one policy in one side goes at the other side. That is why the concept of WEF nexus laws, and especially the water, energy, and food, the basic resources that humans need, and also we need these resources to make the sustainable and constant development. So taking an independent approach disregard the interrelationship between water, energy, and food resources, which would eventually damage the sustainability of individual resource. So Nexus was appeared as a concept to describe and understand the complexity and interrelationship of global resource system. And you may see this diagram before. The energy is used for water and food. Also, water is used for energy and food is used for energy and water. So those three resources are connected, and you can see we cannot divide the interconnection of these three resources at this world. And yeah, so with this background, the Korean government is doing some business project with UNDP for a long time. And this time we focused on the Mekong area. You may understand where Mekong is. Mekong Delta. We say the Mekong Basin. It consists of the several countries: Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and from north to south, the Mekong River flows. The Mekong River is the longest river in Southeast Asia, and the third longest in Asia, and the 12th longest in the world. And this area is is most dynamic and diverse area where agriculture, fisheries, energy, and water interconnected. Also, this Mekong area is famous for the significant region for the high value of culture, history, and development. And as you can see, there are many dams constructed along the Mekong River. So at as of the June 2020, 11 dams are operating, and one is under construction on the upper Mekong area. And lower Mekong area, there are many plans to build the hydropower dams. So the huge impact of the hydropower dams on water resource, and it's very important for the socio-economic consequences. And we also found some previous literature analyzed the water, energy, food security of this Mekong region, and they used in 2017 Yang et al. Analyzed the WEF nexus risk in a Mekong area country, and they used several indicators to measure the risk index: renewable energy profile, water risk index, water withdrawal for agriculture and cultivated land, prevalence of undernourishment, percentage of agricultural land. And combining these all indicators, they finally produced the current resilience index score, which measures the region's vulnerability to the water, energy, and food risk. So this risk range from 0 to 4. 4 means the highest resilience, which means it's pretty good, good status. And the number close to 0, it means their resilience level is very bad. So you can see, we see that the Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, they have the very low index resilience index score, which means they have very high risk in terms of the water, energy, food nexus. So this is why we choose Mekong area for our project, and we are still doing this project, and I'm going to explain our project from now. So for this project, we need a holistic and systematic approach to WEF Nexus. We need to find out the local issues and problem of regarding water, energy, food, and also you may know these three resources are very well affected by the climate change and urbanization. So there are several steps we are doing now. First, we investigate the interrelations of water, energy, food, and we try to model the impact and scenario of the WEF changes, and we find the optimal solution and policy for WEF. And finally, we apply technology to provide multiple effect on WEF. And for these stages, for these steps, we need very heavy analysis, such as the quantitative and qualitative, just like the previous speaker explained in his presentation. We need a lot of data collection system. Also, we need simulation and forecasting, and we have the multi-stakeholders dialogue, and also we interpret the many the regional issues at their local context and their scale. We call P-Link our project, the Korea and UNOSSC, which is the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, which is one branch of the UNDP. And we are we call this project P-Link, and a triangular cooperation project on sustainable development in the lower Mekong River Basin based on the WEF Nexus. The objectives of this project is we want to find out the balanced integrative approach in water, energy, and food management. And we also try to link Korea's technology to the high demand priority of the region. So the target area is the lower Mekong Basin, and we are doing the work with the 4 countries in the Mekong Basin, which are Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. And this is a 5-year project. Actually, it started in the end of 2021. But at that time, we were still in the COVID. So mainly, mostly we began our project last year, 2022, and it will go to the end of 2025. And the budget come from the Korean government, the Ministry of Science and ICT, and the total budget will be $4 billion. And the modality of this project is the triangular cooperation, and the implementing partner is UNOSSC, and there are several implementing parties: Mekong Institute, Mekong River Commission Secretariat, and Science Technology Policy Institute. And besides these 3, there are many more stakeholders in each country, and each country is the central government and local government, and also there are many other the technology research institute and policy institute around this area. We are trying to produce, we expect there are three outcomes. The first outcome is the strengthens water, energy, and food security for basin community well-being. And the output for this part are the knowledge and data collected for purposes of selecting pilot project, at least 3 WEF Nexus projects in the Lower Mekong Basin and other regions analyzed. We analyzed many previous the WEF Nexus project around the world, and I'm going to show the lesson from the case study. The second outcome for this project is that is increased employment and reduced poverty among vulnerable people dependent on river and wetland resources. And we are going to develop the 4 WEF Nexus models designed based on identified project site. And also we are working on the WEF Nexus policy, and this policy is based on the science, technology, innovation, and South-South triangular cooperation. And finally, the pilot project will be implemented in the 4 countries. So we are at the between output 1 and 2 now. So even though this project started in 2021, we are still doing the many research works regarding the output 1, and also we are doing the field works regarding the output 2. So for these countries, we suggest some technology and policy solution to tackle their regional issues regarding water, energy, and food. And we try to model the interrelationship of those 3 resources in the region. And finally, we make some implementation project, pilot project. And after that, after this project, maybe we are thinking to scale up with available fund from the outside Korea. And as I mentioned before, we researched the several the previous project regarding WEF Nexus around the world, and finalized we finalized the lessons as shown in this slide. First, we have to prepare all in advance. There are many challenges in the region. So it's very important to identify key challenges from the beginning. And it's also important to have the clear understanding of the Nexus concept among the stakeholders. And also, we have to prepare the unexpected risk. And then we have to localize demand and the responsibility. Even though this is the regional project, we are working in a very small area in the 4 countries. So it's really important to make the localized framework of the goals indicators, and we need to have the clear roles and expectation among parties, and we need to have the flexible approach depending on the needs and sufficient autonomy and responsibility. And then during the project, it's very important to share and communicate the project with the all relevant parties. So share everything regarding the project and facilitate collaboration and communication, and share the objective and direction of the project among multi-stakeholders. And then for the output and outcome, it's very valuable to create and innovate from this project. So we need expected a new form of thinking, leadership, and commitment. And finally, it's also necessary to move together. Do not behind the schedule, and funding and project management on time. It's very important. Okay, so this is the last one. We make some suggestion for the research and innovation, and I got many questions about the WEF technology. So many people ask me, what is the WEF Nexus technology? And I think there is no clear definition of the Nexus technology. But if any technology applied to solve water, energy, food related problem, and that technology produce multiple effect on WEF, it is regarded as the Nexus technology. And also, it is an important task to identify technology and to design the application framework, because each location and each region has their own characteristic and their property. So the technology solution and the application framework must be the local context. And we can apply many innovative technology, such as the digital technology, IT, technology for digitalization, renewable energy technology, and so on. So these innovative technologies could be some possible tools to solve the local issues. And also, we are trying to improve the existing system and technology currently in use by the area. And we have to consider the local condition, and this project is quite heavily dependent on the local condition. I mean the population density, regional characteristic, and potential nexus approach. So depending on this characteristic, the Nexus approach or the technology solution will be determined. Okay, and the final comment is that even though this the project is the country by bilateral, I mean not by bilateral, but we are working on one by one. I mean each country. The benefit from this project should go to not only the country, but also the whole Mekong region wide. So yeah, so that is the best way to make the sustainability of the product, this project. Okay, so this is the brief introduction of my project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanil, for the P-Link. Actually, like you are really doing a project far away from your home country. I think that is very really challenging thing for the project. Thank you. So floor is open now. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and make the question, please. I think that, okay. Actually, if you have more, you can raise the questions through the chat box. So I'll have make one question to you, Hanil. Actually, can you elaborate more, like really practical challenges you are facing from the preparation of the project? And now, as you mentioned, that even though it should be at certain improved progress stage, but now still you are doing some basic, I mean, the early stage works so far. So could you elaborate some challenges you are really practically facing in the project?
Yeah, and the previous speakers explained in his presentation this water energy food nexus. When you say the WEF nexus, it means there should be various stakeholders involved, and specifically the water, energy, food, the relevant ministry or relevant the stakeholders in each country are very diverse, and there are also some silos among them. So when you thinking about the trade-off and synergies among those three resources, it is very important to communicate all among the all stakeholders. But even in Korea, we are also experiencing the silos among the ministry. But we are doing this project in Mekong area, and yeah, that is very important point. So we from the beginning we try to invite all relevant ministries and parties to our project. So in Cambodia, Laos, PDL, Thailand, Vietnam, there are many ministries involved in WEF resource management. So we invited many stakeholders and let them discuss about their issues and how one policy in one sector affect the other sector. So they should understand the nexus, WEF nexus in real world. So many of them already know what WEF nexus is, but their understanding is just about the theoretical side. But in the real world or in practical world, they have very little experience about the WEF Nexus project. So it was very hard to make all stakeholders together and make them stand on the same page and they move together. So yeah, that is the most difficult point. Also, a very important point. I I uh, I realized from my project.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm really very excited to see the final outcome of the project, and then I really want to see the wonderful outcomes from that project. Thank you.
Thank you.
So okay, so now we will move on to the third speaker, Belinda Petrie. So we'll move on from the lower Mekong region to now Southern Africa Development Community. Okay, so the floor is yours, Belinda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, good day again, colleagues, wherever you are. And thank you again to the previous speakers. I thoroughly enjoyed those presentations. As our chairperson has said, I'll be bringing a Southern Africa as well as a little bit of a global perspective to this discussion. We've heard quite a bit about some other regions. And I've titled this presentation the Water Energy Food WEF Nexus as being little heeded but much needed. That said, so it is much needed in the region. I'll talk a little bit as to why. But just some of the barriers to and challenges and opportunities for strengthening the WEF Nexus and why we need to do it so badly. So I'll talk a little bit about the WEF Nexus in Africa and Southern Africa, also in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals and agenda. I'll look at the regional impacts of climate anomalies and how this is also a driver for the WEF Nexus approach. And then just some more practical examples of the WEF Nexus as an accelerator for sustainable growth. And through the presentation, I'll just go through some emerging best practice examples and key gaps. So firstly, from an Africa perspective and why this matters, just briefly, the physical and socioeconomic exposure is high in many parts of the continent. This is not least because we have a high, still, even with urbanization, we still have a high rural population on the continent. This will change and is changing. And one of the things we know, since we heard about the Mekong, for example, earlier, is that the level of urbanization that we've seen in Asia, in Southeast Asia, is still something that's happening in Africa. So we haven't quite got to that level of urbanization yet. It's happening, and that means that in Africa we have the biggest rates of urbanization in the world at the moment and coming. But it's a catch-up game. But at the moment, there's a high proportion of people that live in rural areas. So that's 60%, depending on where you are in Africa. So that varies also. In some areas, it's even greater than 60%. These people that are farming, and many people that live in rural areas do farm, are over 90% dependent on rainfall and rain-fed agriculture. They also lack access to clean water, enough food, and enough energy. So the WEF Nexus really comes home for the average person on this continent. The spatial interdependence, and to me this is an even bigger factor, is very high in Africa. It's also high in places like the Mekong, where you've got a number of countries that come together. But I'm here to talk about Africa. So climate impacts are not contained within political boundaries. We know that. On this continent, the river basins as well as our aquifers span multiple national boundaries. So the river basins, shared river basins, there are a large number across Africa. There's a lot of them in Southern Africa, which I'll come to just now. And then we have a high predominance of transboundary aquifer systems and groundwater systems across the continent, particularly so in North and West Africa, but we also have them in other parts, transboundary, including in Southern Africa. So the need for cooperative governance and intersectoral cooperation is enormous. The need for cross-boundary, so intergovernmental at an international level, governance is also important. So I think, those two dimensions already, the silo mentality challenges us. You heard my question earlier on the Spanish example, but what we also have in Africa is a spatial interdependence between countries. So it adds complexity to the system. What we also have is a situation where very few plans on this continent currently incorporate spatial, for example, spatial cropping patterns and land use by combining energy and water requirements. So in other words, what I'm saying is there are very few plans that are going on, for development, for example, or at a sector level that factor in the requirements of water and energy to be able to realize those kinds of, for example, sector, agriculture sector plans. So this is an issue that needs to still be addressed. And I think some of the assessments like we saw from Spain this morning, my morning, I know not everybody's, are very helpful in terms of being able to understand what these patterns are and where the trade-off decisions are that need to be made. So on this continent, colleagues, the WEF Nexus is really important for coordinated and sustainable resource management. It's also important for regional cooperation and security, and it's absolutely critical for reducing regional vulnerabilities to population and climate change pressures, among others, but those are the main ones that we are considering at the moment. So to take this down to the Southern African level and the Southern African Development Community, which is SADC, on your slide here, is we've got a high predominance of transboundary river basins in the Southern African region, a high concentration of those. The map on the right shows these. It doesn't show all of the international river basins, but it shows the main ones. So, for example, the Zambezi, which is 8 countries, Orascom, so the Orange Senqu River Basin is 4 countries, and then there are smaller basins like Bapusa, which is between 2 countries, and then the Congo, which is again quite a few countries, and then again the Congo is it's a large country. And then, as I said earlier, there are also transboundary aquifer systems between countries, and they don't. The interesting thing, the challenging thing about the aquifer systems is that they don't track the same boundaries that the river basins do. So a river basin and a water course will have a different spatial map to an underground aquifer. So it adds another dimension of complexity to governance for the water energy food nexus. So the SADC, the Southern African Development Community policy framework has responded, I think, very well to some of these challenges, or it's attempting to respond really well. So it has objectives for regional integration and inclusive socioeconomic development and security. It's trying to debunk the silo-based approach, and particularly debunk the silo approach to resource management and allocation, which is normally handled at a national level. And that's an additional challenge, is that you've got this need for regional cooperation, and SADC, as an example, is trying to promote that. But in the end, there's a limit to what they can do because they're not there to govern the member states. So the national level governance is really, really important. And that interface between national level governance and regional cooperation, I think, is a challenge that we're all still trying to figure out the best solution for. And it's important because the silo-based approach is contributing to the failure to meet development targets in the region. We can see that in the monitoring and evaluation, and that's in turn exacerbating regional vulnerabilities. What to me is interesting as well is that there's a driver for the WEF Nexus in the global frameworks. So, for example, an examination of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals shows you that most of them, 14 of them, are in some or other way related to the WEF Nexus. So, the kind of thinking and approach that you've heard in earlier presentations has got a clear home in terms of the international frameworks. For Southern Africa, as is the case in other parts of the world, climate anomalies such as the ENSO-related droughts produce regional scale effects. So although national level resource allocation is something that SADC, has to promote because it's not mandated to govern the member states, the problem with that, or the challenge that lies with that, is that the responses to the regional scale impacts of climate anomalies needs to be a joined up approach. So we, for example, in the 2015-2016 period, we had heavy droughts across the eastern parts of Southern Africa, primarily, very heavy droughts, and they affected food production, they affected energy security, because some of the countries like Zambia and Zimbabwe, for example, that fall within that belt, are heavily dependent on hydropower production for their electricity. And they were experiencing, those countries, in the region of 16 hours a day of electricity blackouts. as a result of those droughts. And the solutions needed to come from, in that example, both countries, because the Lake Kariba, which sits or straddles Zambia and Zimbabwe, has got hydroelectricity power production plants on it that are both under the Zambian and the Zimbabwean side of governance of that lake. And certainly the management of the hydropower production by the different plants was found to be wanting in terms of managing water abstraction in the periods leading up to the drought, which contributed severely to those impacts. So that's an example of what was not best practice in terms of managing for an extreme event like a long protracted drought, and how important it is for the regulations in these different countries to promote much better proactive management. We also have a situation where resource demand is accelerating, and it's doing this at scale across the region. So just some examples, and these figures come from UNEP research. By 2030, water consumption is expected to be up by 283% as compared to 2005 levels. Sorry, from 20. And electricity demand is expected to be up 70% from 2015 levels. So these are step change increases in demand, and there is no way other than a Nexus approach to manage for that demand. So for example, I mentioned earlier that plans are not factoring in electricity and how much water needed to make, for example, this agriculture sector plan and its targets work. As long as we don't do that, these kinds of projections are going to continue to get in our way. So this pace of change is calling for urgent measures, and Nexus models need to underpin resource mobilization strategies, by which I mean mobilizing for human resources as well as financial resources to implement the different strategies. So a resource mobilization strategy of now and of the future in our minds should factor in the WEF Nexus. In other words, are you going to get food from those that provide, money from those that provide financial resources for energy, as well as from those funders that provide financial resources for food security or for water security. So very important to take a blended approach in resource mobilization strategies as well. In this region, the energy transition is significant. In South Africa, which is a major economic player in the Southern African region, as well as in Africa, the energy transition is being driven by decarbonization. In other parts of the region, the energy transition is primarily being driven by access and increasing access to electricity, which will drive up the demand that you see for electricity to 70% if those figures are correct. Colleagues, the diagram in the middle, which I've borrowed from an excellent piece of research that was done by Declan Conway and Emma Archer and others in the region, really has a look at an integrated approach to responding to the different climate drivers, as well as variability, and how to adopt a Nexus approach to promote water, energy and food security, as well as equitable and sustainable use, which are massive factors across the African continent where inequality remains high and adaptive capacities are quite low. What's useful in Southern Africa, I think, is that, and this is part of our emerging best practice and some good examples, is that we have a fairly robust institutional framework. So those are the regional enablers you see at the bottom of the diagram. So SADC, which I've spoken about already, the Southern African Power Pool, which can take an integrated and is trying to take an integrated approach to promoting energy security, and then our trade mechanisms are also important. So I said that I would talk a little bit about the WEF being a critical accelerator of Africa's sustainable growth. And colleagues, in our work and research to date, Solutions are needed at multiple levels, but particularly at both. And I really want to emphasize the both at the technical level as well as the governance level. So I suppose what I'm saying is that if we do, try and approach or adopt technical solutions and don't pay attention to governance, it's unlikely that the technical solutions would work, and vice versa. So we definitely need both. We also obviously need financial resources. I spoke about that earlier, as well as capacity, human capacity to implement. So I'm not discarding those two. I spoke about them earlier, but I just for now want to focus on technical and governance. So the technical solutions can include in their range, some of these solutions have been spoken about today already, things like water reuse and recycling. Precision irrigation in this region is absolutely critical because of such a high dependence on rain-fed agriculture. And that's a combination, so precision irrigation being drip irrigation powered by solar energy. We also need cold chains to preserve food and crops across the continent, but obviously those also need energy. So crop preservation is a huge issue. Around 40% of food production in Southern Africa is lost before it even gets to anywhere near the market because we don't have those cold chains. One of the reasons we don't have those cold chains is because we don't have the electricity access that I was talking about earlier. The rain-fed I've spoken about. And then what all this means coming together is that smallholder farmers are in a very low negotiation position in terms of being able to negotiate better prices for their food, for their crops, particularly if they're placed in poor grid or off-grid settings. So the WEF, not adopting a WEF Nexus and ensuring that all the aspects are in place, just disadvantages. For example, smallholder farmers that are in areas of low electricity access, which is a good chunk of Southern Africa apart from South Africa, which also has issues. And then, as I said earlier, governance issues or solutions are also key. And these can involve aspects such as harmonized institutions and policies that promote sectoral coordination and enable them of resources. It does involve targets and indicators being established to both direct and monitor the Nexus for inclusive development and for transforming vulnerable communities into resilient societies. A set of integrated assessment models is critical to monitor and evaluate the implementation of the WEF Nexus targets. I think we heard that beautifully from earlier presentations. And ultimately, a regional WEF Nexus framework needs to be adopted. And this is happening, I'll come back to this to some extent in Southern Africa at the moment. The key political instruments for this purpose, as I said earlier, in this region, we've got SADC, we've got the Southern African Power Pool, we've got these integrator institutions. We also have trade of agricultural products, which are important because they embed water transfers at a significant level. So instead of moving the water around, you're moving the food and the electricity around. And in that way, you are moving water around. And so the WEF Nexus also becomes a very important trade mechanism, which I think is emerging best practice in the region because SADC as a development community is certainly focusing on this. So the SADC Regional Nexus project, as an example, is across the region. It started by providing technical support for demonstration projects for precision irrigation in Malawi and Zambia. And it's currently developing and implementing funding proposals to scale the demonstration projects up nationally and then to use the lessons learned for scale across the region. Another excellent example is the more global Water and Energy for Food program, the WEF4F, which is supporting innovative integrated WEF projects globally. And it seeks to target 30 innovators across the Water and Energy for Food Nexus, and ultimately to reach 1 million smallholder farmers, including 250,000 women. So also a very strong gender focus. And then, colleagues, just lastly, I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the governance arrangements that are in place specifically. I keep mentioning it, but a little bit more detail on the governance arrangements that we have in place in the Southern African region to enable some of the solutions I was talking about earlier. So in Southern Africa, the Southern African Development Community has in place a regional indicative strategic development plan. It's an overarching development plan. It cuts across sectors and it's for the region, and it's intended to give guidance to the region on integrated and strategic development. Within that, under that vehicle, various more sector-based policies have also evolved. And so we have in SADC the Regional Strategic Action Plan. It's currently in its 5th iteration. It's usually a 4-year plan, and it gets revised and updated every 4 to 5 years. It is the RSAP, is the vehicle to implement the water component of the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan. But what I've been finding really interesting about RSAP in the last, I don't know, eight or so years is that it's adopted a very strong water, energy, food nexus. So even within the water sector, it is promoting a WEF nexus approach, and something similar is happening in electricity and agriculture. So I'll be 1 more minute. So the WEF nexus is seen by SADC as the means to adapting to population and climate change challenges. It does involve institutional change. It relies on public and private sector implementation, and it includes a strong research component. CTCN, the UNEP Center for Excellence is promoting a project within this approach in Zambia for aquifer planning that is based on water balance studies that combine water and energy requirements. So these are some of the best practice examples. I think I want to just leave us with the thought that we cannot forget the knock-on health impacts of a lack of WEF security. And just to end by saying that resource security is absolutely central to socioeconomic survival and development in the global south. And if we don't adopt these approaches and embed them, we'll end up as victims rather than champions of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belinda. Actually, because it is first webinar meeting, so I could not control the time well. So I think that for the questions to Belinda, you can contact through email. Yeah, I recommend that way. And then I think that is almost time to close the meeting. So I'm sorry for not giving you a chance to answer to questions, and then also we cannot do the panel discussion this time, but later I will manage it well for the effective meeting. But actually, I really appreciate for 3 speakers for the wonderful presentation, and then show real what we should do in the technical way, and then also with the governance and policy levels. I think that those also the assessment tool methodologies, I think it is very useful, and then we can really communicate each other in the future, and then work together to make many fruitful product. And then final announcement is about the next our next webinar on August. So it is about the nature-based solution. So we will, communicate with you for the advertisement. And I thank you everyone for your participation and taking time and make questions. So have a nice Monday, and have a nice week, and then let's communicate together. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Manners.
much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, Belinda and Juanil.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yep. Bye-bye.
Right.